Good afternoon. We okay to start? Yep. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this press conference of the International Observation Mission to the Albanian parliamentary elections. Due to the pandemic, this press conference is being held entirely online. We're sorry not to be able to see you in person, but we're all agreed that safety and health come first. We'll begin with remarks by Mr. Guliyev, Special Coordinator and Leader of the Short-Term OSCE Election Mission, followed by Mr. Alexander Poche, who is Head of the Delegation of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and then, last but not least, Ambassador Ursula Gacek, who heads the observation mission of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. And then, of course, there will be time for journalist questions. Before I give the floor to Mr. Guliyev, I just wanted to mention the fact that we do have a professional photographer here, and so there's no need for you to take screenshots to make use of in your articles and reports, and we'll be happy to provide photos after the press conference is finished. Mr. Guliyev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Andrews, and good afternoon, everyone. In my capacity as OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Vice President and Special Coordinator of the Short-Term Observers, allow me to start by thanking the Albanian authorities for inviting us to observe yesterday's parliamentary elections in line with relevant OSCE commitments. I would also like to thank the people of Albania for their warm hospitality. Allow me also to express my sincere gratitude to Ambassador Gacek and her very qualified and professional team, and to Senator Alexander Poche from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe for an overall excellent and fruitful cooperation. My words of gratitude are, of course, also conveyed on behalf of our head of delegation, Mr. Reynald Lopatka, who has lent an important contribution to this mission, but who is unfortunately unable to be present now due to urgent parliamentary commitments in Austria. We have taken your invitation seriously, and despite the challenges stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, we have done our best to deploy as many observers as we could. This is a manifestation of how much we care for Albania, for its people, and for its future. In this connection, please allow me to note that the presence of the Director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, Mr. Matteo Mekace, and the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Secretary General, Mr. Roberto Mantella, amongst our team and our observers, also bear witness to our commitment. Let me also note that pandemic has represented a cross-cutting challenges, not least on the Central Election Commission, adding to its workload. In this sense, it is rather remarkable that despite COVID-19 and the fact that out-of-country voting was not implemented, the people of Albania voted in large numbers. Turning now to the core of these parliamentary elections, it should be noted that the elections followed by breakthrough political agreement achieved in June last year and which paved the way for electoral reform. As a result of the agreement, the changes in the electoral code undertaken in July last year were based on broad political consensus and followed an inclusive consultative process. This was a very positive development. Unfortunately, unlike the first set of reforms, the second one implemented shortly after, which involved changes to both the electoral code and the constitution, lacked broad consultation with relevant stakeholders. On Sunday, voters had a choice of candidates, and the candidates were able to campaign freely. I would also like to underscore that the key parties and candidates had sufficient confidence in the election to participate. It is worth noting that last year's political agreement also resulted in Albania introducing, for the first time ever, voting technologies to the electoral process. This resulted in electronic voting and the ballot counting being used in 32 voting centers in Tirana. We were pleased to witness that the use of electronic voting and electronic ballot counting mostly proved efficient. Should electronic voting and counting be used more extensively in future elections, it would be important to build public confidence in the system through public discourse and independent scrutiny. In addition to electronic voting and counting, an electronic biometric voter identification system was also introduced for the first time ever in all voting centers across the country. Despite some challenges, reportedly affecting less than 4% of the total number of polling stations, and mainly in rural and remote areas, the system proved overall effective. Our interlocutors have praised the new identification system, perceiving it as a useful step in helping mitigate the risk of double voting, family voting, and voter impersonation. Since we have also not been informed of significant issues related to the accuracy of the voter list, we hope that past concern related to the actual voting will not apply this time. We were also pleased to see that electoral reform has also addressed a number of OHDIR and the Venice Commission recommendations. Meanwhile, several other recommendations continue to remain unaddressed. I would encourage all Albanian stakeholders to engage in a regular political process and address the outstanding recommendations in Albania's best interest. Dear colleagues, dear friends, with respect to the organization of the elections, we were very pleased to observe that the Central Election Commission managed, after all, to adequately fulfill most of its obligations, not least connected, as I said earlier, with the complex introduction and implementation of new e-voting technology. Moreover, the Central Election Commission has also operated transparently and has consequently enjoyed the trust of all relevant stakeholders. As far as campaign is concerned, all electoral subjects could campaign freely despite restrictions imposed due to COVID-19. The campaign, however, lacked vigor. Campaign messaging continued to focus on party leaders rather than on genuine issue-driven platforms. In addition, allegations of vote buying were pervasive during the campaign, indicating that it remained a widespread problem. Despite their robust legal framework in place to prohibit the misuse of administrative resources and minimize the advantage of the incumbency, ministers continued to campaign during official engagements. The resultant publicity gave the ruling party a significant advantage. The provision of incentives and alleged pressure on civil servants remained a concern. During the campaign, it emerged that the database containing the personal information and contact details of approximately 900,000 Albanian citizens, also containing voting preferences, leaked into the public domain. We were told that the electorate viewed the collection of their personal information as a breach of privacy and confidentiality for party interests, which is also of concern. Now allow me to say a few words about the media environment. While there are many media outlets in Albania, editorial independence is negatively impacted by political and other interests of the owners. Lastly, allow me to condemn, in my strongest term, the violent incidents which have preceded Sunday's vote and which have unfortunately resulted in the killing of one person and several others injured in Elbasan. These are unfortunate incidents which have caused human suffering, but have also tarnished the efforts of many others who work tirelessly to improve the system. These incidents should be duly investigated. Any incitement to violence shouldn't be tolerated and will be condemned. In conclusion, let me reassure you that on our side, we stand ready to continue to work closely with the incoming parliament, as well as with all the political forces and stakeholders for the best interests of the people of Albania. I will now hand over the floor to my colleagues for them to convey their important contributions and to complete the picture of our joint observation exercise. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Before we go on, I note that some journalists are already raising their hands on Zoom. If you could just be patient until the other panelists here, heads of delegation, have finished making their statements. You may find that some of your questions have already been answered. Please, Mr. Poche, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Aleksander Poche and I'm Polish senator. My colleague, Azaj Guliyev, covered, I think, everything, so I have not so many things to say. But let me introduce our organization and then to have some remarks. I have a honor and pleasure to lead the delegation of Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. PACE, as we say, has been observing parliamentary election and presidential elections in Albania since 3 decades now, and this is more precisely since 1991. Since that, we were invited by the authorities of Albania to observe the elections, all elections in your country. I would like to thank here the authorities of the country for having invited PACE to observe this election and for their spirit of cooperation. And here let me for one personal remark. I have been here 5 years ago for one of the commission organized by PACE, where the delegation of Albania is very active, and thank you very much for all those work and commitments to our organization from your parliamentarians. And I must say that since those 5 years, I could hardly recognize Tirana, and I'm congratulating the citizens of this country of such a wonderful work. Our delegation of 23 persons was composed of 18 members country of the PACE, representing all 5 political families within the Parliamentary Assembly. Coming from 12 different European member states. Sorry, it was 18 members coming from 12 different European member states. They were accompanied by the legal expert of the Council of Europe's Venice Commission, which is a very well-known body taking care about democracy, rule of law, and human rights. Yesterday, the PACE members observed the voting process in a number of polling stations in Tirana and its surroundings, as well as in Elbasan, Durrës, Kavaje, Diber, Lesje, and Fier, and in the countryside. The PACE delegation is perfectly aware that it was a challenge for the election administration of Albania to organize elections during the COVID pandemic. We are happy that despite of all problems, the electoral process proved to be a successful one in general. A significant number of polling stations, unfortunately, and this is what we detect as problems, a number of polling stations were not accessible for the people with physical disabilities, for handicapped people. In some polling stations, there were respect of social distance. However, in other polling stations, overcrowding was observed. In spite of the general improvement to the overall framework, allegation of practices of vote buying through the election process remain a serious problem. This has a negative impact on the general public perception and trust in the electoral process of the whole or big part of the population. So do the incentives and the pressure put on the civil servants. In general, we can say that the voting day, yesterday, went much better than the time of campaign. Of course, we understand that it is not easy to prove all violation, and it is not our task. We are observers. We are not to judge. Therefore, in this regard, the delegation of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is aware of a number of investigations from the relevant Albanian authorities of serious cases and expects to be informed about the results in the due course. We will prepare at PACE the final report on the observation of this parliamentary election, which will be adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly Standing Committee on 28th of May. Finally, I want to mention that PACE, through its monitoring procedure, as well as the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, are ready to continue the collaboration with the Albanian authorities to further improve the legal electoral framework in the country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. In case there are any of you who were not aware of the fact, there is interpretation into Albanian. If you go down to the bottom of your screens on the Zoom, there's an interpretation button on the right, and you can choose between English and Albanian. We do have simultaneous interpretation if it's necessary. Now, please, if we go on to the last presentation from Ambassador Gacek, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katja. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you first of all to our parliamentary colleagues who joined us before Election Day and made a very valuable contribution to the observation, an observation which has been conducted by OSBE-OHDIR since mid-March. Observing the process for such a length of time, including in all the 12 regions where we had teams of long-term observers, allows me to conclude that after the many political conflicts in Albania in recent times, trust in the election process started to be rebuilt. Mainly as the result of the long-awaited agreement last summer, which ended a political stalemate. The key stakeholders had sufficient confidence in the election process to participate in it. The political parties ran in the election. The voters turned out at the polls in increased numbers. There was trust in the reformed Central Election Commission and indeed in the election administration at all levels. The implementation of new technologies, especially the countrywide use of e-identification systems, which has played an important role in increasing voters' confidence in the process, was nevertheless implemented in a short period of time. And it was a challenge. And as the special coordinator, Mr. Guliev, has already mentioned, there were some technical hitches on election day. Overall, however, our assessment of voting and counting, well, counting so far, of course, as the count continues as we speak, where we observed is that the election day processes were largely transparent and smooth. The election was generally well organized. As I said, our mission had already been in Albania for over 5 weeks before election day. This gave us ample opportunity to talk to a great number of stakeholders, not only here in Tirana, but not only the senior political figures, but also many people out in the regions, to observe firsthand local campaign events, to follow up allegations of wrongdoings. I was personally able to visit Durres, Berat, Elbasan and Lezhë in the past weeks and to meet with candidates, including independents, local mayors, but also with active and engaged members of civil society. It was the length and breadth of our observation which allowed us to see for ourselves how the ruling party obtained a significant advantage from its position, including through its control of local administration and from the misuse of administrative resources. We also learned of allegations of vote buying by political parties during the campaign period, something which is always very elusive because of its criminal nature to pin down. But this is confirmed now by a high number of investigations already opened before election day. I strongly agree with Senator Poce that this has an impact on voter confidence. And now it is the effective and just reaction of the relevant authorities that will play an important role in mitigating the negative perception voters have of this practice. Our long-term observers in the field remain out in the regions for the rest of this week. They will continue to report on the count. They will follow up on the response of the relevant authorities to allegations of irregularities both before election day and on election day. Together with the team of analysts, I will stay in Albania until the 7th of May. We will follow up any complaints and appeals lodged through the courts and the relevant bodies here. Only when we have seen the process through will we be able to conclude our work, to write our final report, and to make the all-important recommendations which we hope will be helpful to the authorities in dealing with outstanding problems. In conclusion, I would like to say that at the beginning of this mission, I promised that despite the difficulties of COVID, I promised a credible, evidence-based assessment, an impartial and thorough assessment of the 2021 election. I am confident that together with the colleagues here, we have delivered that to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Journalists, it's your turn now. As none of you are here, it's impossible to see how many media outlets are represented, so I would be grateful if you could introduce yourself to begin with and say which media outlet you represent. If you raise your hand, then I will unmute you, I hope. And we will begin with Report TV. Please go ahead. Can you unmute yourself? I'm afraid you'll have to unmute yourself. I can't do it for you. We can't hear you. You're still muted as far as I can see. No. We'll try with the next one. No. Now you look as though you're unmuted. Is this our side or the journalist? It's theirs. Okay, so we move on to the next one for now. ABC News, please.
Përshëndetje. Unë jam Esiona Konomi.
Hello, my name is Esiona Konomi from ABC TV. Dear observers, my impression is that you are all career politicians and you've probably run in elections yourself. The party, you mentioned this database containing personal data and potential voting preferences. And this is a practice used in other countries in the world. I just want to know from your opinion, is it normal for a political party to own such sensitive personal data in addition to potential voting preferences, including also personal data like phone numbers, job? Is it normal to have such massive data, sensitive personal data, uncontrolled?
Thank you very much. Maybe I start, then I will ask our colleague to follow. Of course, as I mentioned in my statement, that the leakage of the personal information and the database of the individual citizens of Albania is a great concern, because this is a matter of breaching the privacy and confidentiality of the voters. So it is the Albanian authority to have some investigation and to give some legal assessment to this issue. So we just fix that issue and try to reflect in our statement, in our, I would say, the findings and the conclusions. I think it is really a matter that the Albanian authority should take care of it further. As the experience or practice used in different countries, I can say that there are a few countries in OECD, I can say on behalf of OECD, they are trying to use to electronize the voting system, but I would say Albania is one of the first countries who has already implemented this. I do hope that it will be get enough confidence among the different political stakeholders and will be further improved. Thank you. Mr. Poche, please.
Yes, we are, as you mentioned, myself, I'm a politician. And of course, somehow my job is to show what I feel politically. And from the other side, elections is vice versa. The citizens should stay safe. And why we have the secret vote? Because this vote should remain secret one. So any leak of any information that could detect how I'm going to vote and exposing the citizens to the threat that their political orientation can be detected is of course a threat for the democracy and for normal vote. As far as I know, there is, we don't know how that really happened and who's behind. So we are not making any allegation. We are just saying, and this is not only for Albania, this is for any country. This is how the democracy can be somehow in danger. And this works for any country, not only for Albania. Thank you.
I think this was a question directed to the parliamentarians, to the politicians, and as I'm not a politician, I think I will pass on that question.
We go on to top channel now.
Thank you, Katja. Good afternoon, dear Excellency Ambassador Gacek. Senator Pociew and you mentioned the vote buying, but I'd like asking you if your short-term and long-term observers managed to secure any proof about the vote buying during the observation in Albania. Thank you very much.
Yes, I can answer this. During the day of vote, I understand we had one allegation of this kind, which is obviously not a big problem, but our long-term observers let us know that several cases were detected, and in our statement we are basing on and I mentioned this as well, that this is a procedure which are not finished, and I spoke about allegations, not about the facts, allegations. And as we are since long time in observing in many countries, we are very touchy about any allegations, and for that reason I said that we are going to continue observing how those allegations will end, the proceedings among the authorities, appropriate authorities in Albania, and we are going to monitor this. Once again, as I said, Albania is under monitoring by PACE, and this is going to be a part of our future work, to find out whether those allegations were correct or not correct. If, of course, and I taking these opportunities to say so, if there will be a negative answer, so if those allegations will not be truth, of course, this will be reflected in our reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. Yes, this is very regrettable that we have credible reports of this. Senator Pociew has said that firsthand, with the people we were able to deploy, we saw one instance. However, the long-term observation here was important. And of course, it is always very difficult to track down these incidents, and we have to base our report on credible evidence. But credible evidence is not only our first-hand observation, but also what is reported, and, for example, the special anti-corruption structure, the SPAC, now currently has 30 ongoing cases dealing with allegations of vote buying. So despite quite a substantial effort that was made by the Central Election Commission, which really made voters aware of first the criminal nature of both selling and buying votes, and also encouraging people not to lose that right, as well as the international community, many members of civil society. We still see these instances, and they're not attributed to any one party, or not even entirely two political parties. So, as I mentioned, for voters to have confidence in the system, and for this vote buying, which has not only been evidenced this time, but is generally perceived to be a problem from long time ago, for this to be finally put behind Albania, I think now the reaction of the relevant authorities on how they deal with these instances, and whether they deal with them justly, using due process, and whether it is made clear that this is not a permitted and will not be permitted. That is the only way that confidence can be restored. I mentioned at the start of my intervention, we're seeing the start of restoring of confidence, but it's the start of the restoring of confidence. And these steps and what happens after the election are also going to be very important, whether the confidence that was partly restored will be a permanent feature in Albanian elections or not.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have time for about 2 more questions. Aura News, please go ahead.
Përshëndetje, unë jam Sonela Beleshi.
Hello, my name is Sonela Beleshi from Aura News TV. You commended the Central Election Commission for organizing these elections, but I am right now at the Central Election Commission. It's 20 hours from the closing of the ballot papers, and we have not yet seen a figure about the turnout, your voters' turnout. Is this normal in a democratic country? That's the first question. The second question is about the COVID-infected people. The government decided for people who had gotten infected not to vote. Do you think we should need to make changes to the electoral code? So these people did not vote. They did not exercise their right to vote. So, and that was considered to be the best option. However, 2 weeks before the voting, the technical committee of experts decided for Albanians living in Greece, and we have a big number of Albanians living in Greece, so more than 400,000. So if they would come to Albania in this time, they would have to isolate themselves for 2 weeks, which would make it impossible for them to vote. Is that a decision which, again, violates their right to vote? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me answer the first question, and it's an excellent question. It was a lot of discussion among our observers about completely different approach. Because normally, in other countries, most of the countries, the counting of votes is done in a polling station. But, and of course, the system in Albania is different, so it takes more time. But let me answer that way, that, for example, I was observing elections only 1 month ago in Bulgaria. And the most of allegation of something tricky, of the electoral frauds, was about counting votes in a polling station. So I cannot answer you whether one system or the other is better or worse. But I must say that there is some inconvenience and some good things in this. And about voting abroad, that was also our concern. And we strongly believe that, like the elections last year in Poland, or those last in Bulgaria, we in Poland and authorities in Bulgaria, they managed to organize, restricted, because in COVID it's very difficult, but they managed to organize elections abroad. And personally, I strongly believe that the citizens who live abroad, they have the right to express their willings by voting. And this is also about democracy. Thank you.
If you allow me, I also to give a short comment on what have been said by our journalist friends. 3 questions have been raised. First is about the Albanians living in Greece that were not allowed under some circumstances to exercise their rights for voting. We understand, of course, the restriction imposed by COVID-19, but I would say my personal opinion and my personal view that in such cases, of course, it would be appreciated if the citizens or eligible voters could have a chance to exercise their rights in the respective countries where they reside. There are many examples, there are many, I would say, practices that those who are considered the citizens of the respective countries have a right to choose, to make a choice or to vote in the embassies that the country has accredited. So it could be, of course, it could be an issue of the legislation of Albanian electoral code, but I do hope that it might be a topic for the further discussions among the political parties, whether to see how they can resolve this issue and what type of consensus they can reach. This is the first. About the turnout, maybe Madam Ambassador would have enough information about the issue. Maybe it is better for Ambassador to comment on that issue, why it has not been established so far. But what concerns COVID-19 restrictions, that the people who are ill, that are not allowed to, exercise their votes, of course, we can understand that there should be appropriate conditions for them, allow them to in somehow exercise their votes, right for voting. But in that case, I think I would leave to the local authority further reconsider this issue, because nobody knows that the COVID pandemic when will be ended. So this is the general view, but I do hope that Madam Ambassador would have some detailed explanation on all the issues that you raised. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the 3 very interesting and important questions. So the first one is regarding the speed of the counting, of the reporting of the results. And here I would say that I would never want to see the transparency and accuracy of the process sacrificed to speed. And for me, and for our mission, it is much more important that the system is transparent. And of course, we see that the results, with maybe a few glitches, are coming up on the CEC website. And their accuracy, of course, is something that will be evident once we see whether there are any calls for recounts or whether there are complaints and appeals. The system is complicated this time round. For the first time, Albanian voters have not only had the possibility of choosing the party of their choice, but also, should they wish, indicating the candidate on the list who they prefer to see as their member of parliament. So it is natural that this process is going to take longer than normal. For me, the rate of counting is not as much of a concern. That is not a concern. It is the transparency and accuracy. Secondly, you mentioned that COVID-infected persons and also persons in self-isolation or quarantine were unable to vote. And we do remark upon that. It was also noted in our report that while the law allows it, no provision was made for voting in hospitals. One of the ways that it is possible to facilitate voting for persons who are unable to leave their home or a hospital is to use mobile ballot boxes. But they do not come without their own problems, whether the voters will trust the system enough, or whether there is credibility in the process of using the mobile ballot boxes. So it is a fine decision between the using of, for example, a mobile ballot box and unfortunately disenfranchising a group of people who were unfortunate enough to be infected by COVID or happen to be in hospital for other reasons or unable to leave their homes for another reason. And we do make a reference to it in our report. And thirdly, you touch upon the problem of voters abroad, of their ability to cast a vote abroad. And while it varies from country to country in the OSCE participating states, whether provision has been made for this, I have to stress there is no international standard which places an obligation on a state to create the possibility of voting abroad. If voters were prohibited, for example, they were taken off the voter list and completely disenfranchised, then that is a breach of the international standard. But they would normally have the possibility to come back. And here we have the problem of COVID and of the travel restrictions. But it must be said in fairness that we, of course, are following the situation of voters from North Macedonia and from Greece because of the additional restrictions the Albanian authorities impose. But please remember, COVID travel restrictions are international in nature, and they often work both ways. It might be the case that you could come to Albania from wherever you reside abroad, but then going back to your place of residence would also be a problem. So COVID has created challenges. And when you mention the Greek voters, of course, please be aware that we devote a substantial part of our work also to the possibility for national minorities to be fairly represented in an election. So I would refer you to the report, towards the end of our report, to look at our assessment of the position of national minorities. COVID has created additional challenges, and these are, I would say, all reflected in our findings and in our assessment. And if there are long-term recommendations to be made stemming from this situation, we will also be sure to address them in our final report.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we only have time for one more question, so I'm going to take the next one chronologically and in the queue. It's Siri TV. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
This is the interpreter speaking. I can't hear the journalist. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe this is Fiorella from Ora News. Maybe you didn't get my question. Well, I didn't mention counting. Albanians are used to getting the results of counting 2 days after. I was talking about the turnout, the voter turnout. We don't yet know how many Albanians voted on Sunday. So we're not worried about counting. We can still wait about the counting results. But the voter turnout, how many Albanians voted?
I would allow the Central Election Commission and all the election administration to get on with their job, to do it thoroughly, and I would be patient and wait for the turnout figure too.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid that is all we have time for today, because the heads of delegation have other meetings that they have to go to. Thank you very much for your interest and all your questions, even in this challenging situation. Just to let you know, as you're not here to pick up the press release and the copies of the statement in person, they are already uploaded to the OSCE website, and you can find them there now. Thank you very much again. Until next time, goodbye.